joined online by Eric Bischoff, a renowned wrestling entrepreneur from his time in WCW, WWE Raw, and TNA Impact, and a renowned GM. Eric has been, over the last 2 decades, perhaps the last 3 or 4 decades, Eric has been heavily involved in the wrestling industry all over the world. And we set Eric a specific task now. We set Eric to judge, as he's worked in all the top industries, to judge what he believes have been the top 10 wrestlers from 2000 to 2020 that have led the most mark on the wrestling industry. So we just gave a list of names for Eric to choose from, and any person that is not on this list, this is just a list that we provided for Eric, just to clarify that. So we have The Rock, Jane Johnson, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Triple H, Hunter Helmsley, Shawn Michaels, Mick Foley, Y2J, Chris Jericho, Kurt Angle, The Undertaker, Kane, Sting, the late great Eddie Guerrero, Booker T, Brock Lesnar, Batista, Goldberg, Edge, John Cena, Randy Orton, Mr. Anderson, Ken Anderson, Rey Mysterio, CM Punk, AJ Styles, Roman Reigns, Jeff Jarrett, and Rob Van Dam. So we believe, Eric, that these are the wrestlers that have been most prominent in the wrestling industry over the last 20 years at the Summit. Is that a fair reflection?
Well, it's certainly a great list of names, you know, and when people talk about who's the best wrestler, you know, of a certain era, you know, it's very subjective. You know, as somebody who has been a promoter and a television producer, you know, I tend to look at, from a business perspective, who is the most successful. Whereas some fans may, you know, consider the in-ring work to be the most important factor in any of that. So it's all a very subjective point of view. But yeah, we'll take our best shot. You know, I don't have the list sitting in front of me, unfortunately. I've been a little busy the last couple of days, as you know. It's been a little difficult to coordinate this. So I think from my perspective, right off the bat, definitely The Rock. I don't think there's any way that one can honestly analyze that list of names and not agree that The Rock, because of the impact that he had on the wrestling industry, the fact that Rock has gone on to become one of, if not the highest paid movie star in the world, and just the fact that he's such an amazing character.
And Eric, would you have Rock in your top 5, for example?
Oh, definitely. Rock in the top 5, along with John Cena.
And in terms of, you mentioned John Cena there, another person in your top 5. And what do you think John has brought to the wrestling industry over the last two decades? A pure sort of wrestling sort of a fan, his longevity and his dedication to the craft and the cause.
I think that John has become synonymous with what every promoter wishes they had. To represent their brand. John is not only a great performer in the ring, which he is, and you know, you can debate his technical expertise, but some of the biggest names in the business weren't necessarily the greatest technical wrestlers. But I think John has brought credibility, class. John is the type of person who can represent not only WWE, but the industry of professional wrestling at a level and in a way that very few others can.
So far, in relation to your top 10, you have 2 guys so far in your top 5, Rock and John Cena. And in terms of other guys further down, maybe the list just below The Rock and John Cena, further down the pecking order, or in your top 10?
Well, I didn't hear Randy Orton's name on that list. Perhaps it was, and I just missed it. But I think in terms of in-ring work and character and persona, as well as consistency, I think Randy Orton definitely belongs in the top 5 as well.
So in terms of, you've John Cena, you've The Rock, you've Randy Orton, and looking at some of the going back to the late 2000 era, some of the guys there like Triple H, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Undertaker, I suppose they'd be guys who would feature in your top 10, I imagine.
Well, you know, I have a hard time, you know, with guys like, you know, Stone Cold Steve Austin, who arguably is right up there with The Rock and John Cena in terms of the amount of money and revenue that he generated and all of that. To me, you know, Stone Cold Steve Austin is really a product of the late 90s.
Okay.
as opposed to the 2000s. So I think, you know, based on the technical parameters of this voting system, I think, you know, Steve falls probably more in the 90s era than the 2000s era, but certainly one of the biggest names of the last 20 years in the history for sure. In that same regard, I think Rey Mysterio definitely belongs in the top 5 as well. Again, even though Rey Mysterio really became popular and really took the main stage, if you will, in WCW back in 1996 and 1997, he went on to become one of the more popular characters, or one of the more popular characters in the 2000s. So again, based on the parameters, I would say probably Rey Mysterio falls into that category as well.
So we have 4 guys so far in terms of your top 10. I suppose other guys on the list, would Brock Lesnar, I suppose, would he get into your top 10? And
you know, not really. And it's not because I don't enjoy Brock's work. I do. And I think Brock is an amazing performer who has brought a lot to the industry in terms of mainstream publicity, because of the fact that, you know, Brock Lesnar, you know, competed at such a high level, was a champion in the UFC. You know, very few people remember or acknowledge that Brock was also, he also was a walk-on for the National Football League here in the United States, which, you know, if you know anything about American rules football, the chances for a high-level collegiate player to make it into the NFL is probably somewhere around 3%. Brock never played football, ever, in college. He was a wrestler. So for an athlete like Brock Lesnar to walk on to an NFL team, the Minnesota Vikings, and make the team and become activated as a player, and he had zero, you know, American Rules Football League experience or football experience in general, I think it is an amazing thing. So I think the world of Brock Lesnar as an athlete, but I don't think that Brock Lesnar has had the overall impact on the industry as some of the aforementioned names.
And speaking about that, a guy that made his name in TNA Impact over the last 2 decades, I suppose AJ Styles now with the WWE. Would AJ Styles feature in your top 10, Eric?
I think so. And I think AJ, even though AJ got a little bit of a late start, you know, he started in TNA and for the most part, you know, performed in obscurity as it relates to the kind of exposure that he has now. But I think definitely, you know, if anybody really typifies the class of the 2000s, the first decade of the 2000s, who's emerged to become a major player, definitely AJ Styles fits on that list.
I suppose a guy that's made his a major move in the last few years coming out of the Shield in terms of next Roman Reigns. He's sort of the forefront runner in the WWE at the moment in terms of big matches and high publicity matches, but probably hasn't been across the industry in terms of longevity. Is it too soon for Roman Reigns to be considered in this list?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. Roman Reigns is, as a performer and as a character, Roman Reigns is doing great, but I think he's been mishandled creatively for quite a while. And as a result of that, hasn't reached his peak yet as a performer. Every time he's gotten a little bit close, he's stumbled. No fault of his own. But the character has stumbled. So it would be real hard for me to put him in that category at this point.
And how about the CM Punk? I suppose out of wrestling for the last few years, but CM Punk, during his time in WWE, he brought this new sort of a retro sort of attitude era, and he was a dominant character for a number of years.
Relatively speaking, those number of years was a cup of coffee, and he was gone before the coffee got cold. So it just didn't have the longevity to be considered, in my opinion. That doesn't take anything away from him. He's a great character and a great performer, and certainly created some waves early on in his career, but in his WWE career. But top 10 of the 2000s, I don't think so.
And I suppose mention other names. Chris Jericho, Y2j. I suppose he's served. He's now had multiple championship reigns from Intercontinental to WWE, undisputed champion. He's a Ray tag team champion. he's won it all, really.
He has, and again, Chris Jericho. I really brought Chris Jericho to the forefront. In the mid '90s, as a part of the cruiserweight division in WCW on Monday Nitro. That's where Chris Jericho really became, from a wrestling fan's point of view, a household name. So it's, again, hard to put him in that 2000s category, except for the fact that Chris Jericho has reinvented himself so many different times over the last decade or two that he certainly should be in that category.
Okay, so Eric, we have 6 names so far, and I suppose I'm going to throw out another name to you now. I suppose The Undertaker's younger brother, Kane, such a powerful, meaningful force. Again, a guy who's held so many titles, and he started off towards the late end of the 90s, but then towards 2000, 2010, he was a real prominent figure.
Yeah, Glenn Jacobs, who plays the character Kane, is a friend of mine, and I have a ton of respect for him. But I don't think that I don't think that Kane really drove the business in a significant enough way. It was always very important, and he was always very near the top. But Kane, as a standalone character and a main eventer, it would be hard to put him in that top 10 category. As much as I like him and respect him, it's hard to say that he's had as significant of an impact on the industry as the aforementioned talent.
Yeah, I suppose the Olympic gold medalist Kurt Angle, so prominent as well. His time WE, and especially rejuvenated TNA Impact when he went there. He sort of brought that business to a whole new level in the 2000s. And I suppose would Kurt make your list?
Yeah, definitely Kurt would. Again, Kurt, became more or less a household name to wrestling fans around the world, in the late 90s. But once again, I think he reached his peak in the 2000s and certainly had an impact. The fact that he was a gold medal winner, and then transitioned to such a high level in professional wrestling, without a doubt makes him worthy.
Yeah, and I suppose the late great Eddie Guerrero, so monumental in his time in WCW with the Renegades as such, but then he went to WWE, Eddie, and he became a heavyweight champion, and he was really blossoming into the real face of the brand before Lord Mercy he's departed from the world.
Yeah, and one of the things, and definitely Eddie deserves to be in that category, and I think the reason for it is not the championships he won or any of that, but I think Eddie Guerrero, more than any heel in the wrestling business in the 2000s, Eddie probably did a better job of really being a heel. He took being a heel to a level that we hadn't seen in a long time. Eddie mastered the art of being a heel, and he embraced it. Very few wrestlers who play the roles of heel really embrace that heel character. They come close, but they don't fully commit. And Eddie fully committed to being a heel, but he did so in such an artful and entertaining way that I think he set the standard that few people have even come close to since his passing.
And I suppose, Eric, Kane's older brother, The Undertaker, the streak we all know from WrestleMania, and so many years throughout the 2000s, he headlined WrestleMania, took on all the big names that stood before him and all the up-and-comers, and it was a real testamental, if you're going to make it, Undertaker WrestleMania. And I suppose Undertaker, still prominent in big matches throughout the 2000s. Would he make your list?
No question about it. For the same reason that I chose Rock right away and John Cena right away, Undertaker deserves to be right in that mix, maybe at the very top of that list.
Okay.
For all the same reasons. If you look at consistency, if you look at the amount of money that Undertaker has generated for the industry, and let's face it, it takes money for the industry to survive. The reason the industry is as healthy as it is today is due in large part because of the influence that WWE has had around the world for the last 30 years. And Undertaker has been a very instrumental part of that financial success, which has allowed WWE to become so big, which has motivated and created opportunity for independent wrestling companies from all over the world. Because WWE has made the sport, the genre of professional wrestling far more important and recognized today than it ever has been in the history of the industry. And Undertaker was right at the nucleus of that. So without question, Undertaker needs to be there. And as you pointed out, you know, one of my favorite matches from WrestleMania involved Undertaker and AJ Styles, two guys that are in our current top 10. You know, the Boneyard match that we saw at WrestleMania. So without question, Undertaker.
I suppose, Eric, we have 9 spots left. We have 1 spot to go. So far, you have Undertaker, The Rock, John Cena, Eddie Guerrero, Randy Orton, Rey Mysterio, AJ Styles, Chris Jericho, and Kurt Angle. So I'm going to just mention out the final sort of 4 or 5 names for you.
No, I've already got mine. I already got it. Booker T.
Booker T.
Booker T. Booker T, again, you know, to have, and here's what I admire. I mean, there's so many great things to admire about Booker T. Not the least of which is his skills and ability as a performer. But that's not why I think he belongs in that category. Booker T did what most wrestlers from WCW couldn't do when WWE absorbed WCW, right? And bought WCW. Booker T came into WWE as a WCW guy. And in most cases, in many cases, that was 3 strikes against you, or at least 2 strikes against you. It made it even harder for you to really ascend from a career point of view, character point of view into WWE. Booker T overcame all that. Booker T was a hugely popular character in WCW who went on to become an even larger character in WWE. And along the way, during that journey, he really refined his art. He refined his character. He refined his timing. While he may not have been in the best physical condition of his career because he was getting older already, you would never know that. You wouldn't know that to this day if you were to meet him. And I think his skill, both on the microphone, in terms of promos, his abilities in the ring, his abilities to host a show or handle color commentary, all of that, I think, represents a tremendous amount of talent, makes him one of the more well-rounded members of our top 10, or at least my top 10, and definitely deserves to be in that same category. And I'm not saying he deserves to be number 10. He could arguably be number 3 or 4, or 2 or 3 for that matter. I would have to sit down and really analyze that, but he definitely deserves to be in anybody's top 10, in my opinion.
And I suppose, Eric, we have your top 10 now, and just probably 3 names, as I was going to mention beforehand, that didn't make it. Just a quick note on those: Triple H, Shawn Michaels, and Edge.
Clearly, all of them, all 3 people that you mentioned, have contributed, performed at the highest level. But I can't honestly say that any of the 3 had the significance of impact that my top 10 have. It doesn't mean they're not important, doesn't mean that they weren't hugely successful, doesn't mean that I don't admire them. But there's, Triple H, for the most part, even though he's been in that top position for such a long time, Triple H was at his best when he was part of an ensemble. Triple H was at his best when he was a part of DX, in my opinion. Triple H never became a really amazing heel. That one heel that everybody couldn't wait to see get beat. He played the role of a heel, and he did it very well. But he didn't do it well enough, like Eddie Guerrero, to own his heeldom, so to speak, if you understand what I mean. Edge, I think great career, amazingly successful. One of my favorite people in the wrestling industry. I am not taking anything away from him at all. part of the reason I don't think he fits into that category as well is because of the quality of the people in that category, his peer group. He came into the industry when the industry was chock full with amazing talent, like Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Undertaker and, The Rock and so many others. So John Cena. So it for that reason, it's kind of like his time, as great as he was, he was great during a time when there was a lot of other great talent there. And as a result of that, he didn't really emerge as that one guy.
And lastly, I suppose for the reasons Stone Cold didn't qualify for you, Eric, I suppose that's the same reason Shawn Michaels didn't qualify either.
Yeah, I mean, when I think of Shawn Michaels, I think, I remember watching Shawn Michaels in the 80s. I worked with Shawn Michaels in 1987 and 88 in the AWA, when he was teamed up with Marty Jannetty. So I just don't think of Shawn Michaels, even though he had some amazing matches and great contributions, but he was a supporting cast member really to Rock, Stone Cold Steve Austin, John Cena, Undertaker, and others, and for the most part. So I think more than anything, just because I identify Shawn so much with the 80s and 90s, it's hard for me to put him in that category.
So that concludes Eric Bischoff's top 10 wrestlers from 2000 to 2020. I'll just call back the list. So again, we have Undertaker, Rock, John Cena, Eddie Guerrero, Randy Orton, Rey Mysterio, Booker T, AJ Styles, Chris Jericho, and Kurt Angle. And I suppose, are you happy with all those names, Eric? There's no one else that stands out to you. For you, if you had to compile a roster tomorrow morning and you offered 10 spots, would those be the 10 guys you put in?
Yeah, I'd take all 10 of them.
On that note, Eric Bischoff, an absolute pleasure talking to you this evening, and stay safe, and we wish you all the best in your future endeavors, and no doubt we'll see you on our TV screens in the near future again. Take care, Eric.
Did you just fire me?
No, Eric.